simple ways, not then appearing as his cloistered scholar with threadbare habit hardly worth $1. In other words, the way he dresses tells you that he's spending his money on his garments, which obviously he shouldn't do. But much more like a doctor or a pope. Of double worsts was the semicope upon his shoulders, and the swelling fold about him, like a bell about its mold, when its casting rounded out his dress. It almost appears as if Chaucer is calling into question the dressing of the Pope as being too celebrated, too high-end, we might say. So notice already, Chaucer is very much in that tradition of what later Protestants will say about problems within the Catholic Church related especially to money. So Chaucer is way ahead of his time in this regards. He lists a little out of wantonness here again meaning the desire to have sex. So the way he talked especially to girls was to try to seduce them. To make his English sweet upon his tongue, when he had played his harp or having sung, his eyes would twinkle in his head as bright as any star upon a frosty night. This, notice, dark irony, right? This worthy's name, clearly Chaucer doesn't think of him as worthy, but notice this worthy's name was Hubert, and then notice the last bit of it, it appeared. In other words, he called himself Hubert, but I don't know that really was his name at all. In other words, let's go ahead and write it in our notes now. Chaucer is pointing out, this is a cat you cannot trust. He is a, let's write the word down, hypocrite. Hypocrite. Now what is a hypocrite? Someone who says one thing, but what? Does something else. And Chaucer will point out about our Friar that he is a hypocrite. Let's go ahead and say it about now our three religious that we are looking at. The nun prioress, the monk, and the friar. Let's make some general observations at 2a real quickly. First, clearly, Chaucer is going to say about all three of them that they have different shades of hypocrisy, right? For example, for the nun prioress, she pretends like she knows French, but she really doesn't, right? For the monk, he's supposed to be inside of his cloister cell studying, but instead he's out hunting with his dogs. For the friar, this is our worst one, isn't it? He's doing all kinds of naughty, nasty, and he's not supposed to. Chaucer clearly then has an agenda here. We'll write down at 2a. Chaucer's agenda here is to point out the hypocrisy of the church, and he's going to do it in different ways. Number 2, let's point out that Chaucer is clearly setting us up as readers to wonder what kind of story will each one of these three tell. And their stories will be related to their personality types, which tells you that the friar's story might not be a very safe story. It might be, in fact, a pretty outlandish story. And again, I'll let you read it on your own. We, in our time together in 303, we will not be reading the stories of either the monk or the friar. Okay? Let's point out at 2b really quickly the brilliance of Chaucer's satire. Chaucer didn't invent satire, right, as we have said in earlier lectures, but he definitely uses this satire. He's making fun of the church's hypocrisy for a purpose. He obviously wants people to be aware that there are some people within the church of his day who are not very authentic at all. Some of that lack of authenticity ain't no thing. Like, for example, a nun prioress who really doesn't know French. But others who fall under Chaucer's condemnation, like this friar, not a very good thing at all. And Chaucer may be, in fact, wanting to educate people about, be aware, not always are the religious what they appear to be. This use of Juvenalian and Horatian satire we want to put then at 2b as being very important for Chaucer. Let's think now about 3a. What is for you your favorite film about a religious person who is not very religious? In other words, a hypocrite, not what he or she appears to be. Okay? Do you have any video game where this kind of motif steps out at all for you? I've had students that say, it's funny, now that I start thinking about it, this is kind of a motif that we see played out over and over again. For example, even in Romeo and Juliet, let's write that one down. Remember, Friar Lawrence is the one who kind of says to Romeo and Juliet, I'll go ahead and marry you guys even though your parents don't know. Majorly against the rules, right? Okay. Interestingly, in that play, Friar Lawrence is one of the last people to speak. And when he does speak, he tries to defend himself in some very subtle ways. Why? Because religious people are two things: well-educated usually, and they're good talkers, which means they can get away with stuff because they're so good at speaking, right? That motif. Do you have, for example, a film that you can think of where, for example, the religious person in the film or in the movie or in the TV show is not really everything he or sometimes she appears to be? Okay? Finally, 3B. What are your thoughts about hypocrites? What are your thoughts about people who say one thing and mean something else? Either they're religious or they're not religious. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that lack of authenticity has hurt religion? Do you think that at times people will look at people who are supposed to be religious and see about them in the way they live their life as being inauthentic, hypocritical, and then they kind of draw conclusions about it's not a really good thing to be like that? So here you go, an introduction to our religious people. We'll see more of these as we get on into the general prologue.